All right, welcome to Johnny's Garage. We got a special show going this week. You got me sitting here in my new shirt. What happens in the garage stays in the garage, but everybody knows that ain't the truth. And I got Mr. Big Death Row sitting right next to me.
Hey, everybody, how we doing tonight? Ready to have a good time?
All right, this show tonight, we're going to talk about a young man. If any of you went to GCW, either in Columbus or Phoenix City, you would have saw this gentleman. His name was Chuck Weick. He was our ring inspector. It was there's no job in the world as ring inspector, but he was a special person. He had a few problems when he was born, and he had some disabilities, but the greatest guy in the world. I loved him and his family. 14 years ago, he passed away. So
has it really been 14 years?
In 14 years ago, he passed away just a few days after my son had his first birthday.
That is just ridiculous, man.
14 years. Yeah. He actually, for my son's first birthday, he got him. It was a little truck. I don't even know if they still make them. They were called Chuck trucks.
Yeah.
It was a little motorized thing. He gave him a Chuck truck and a dollar bill. He said, now he'll never forget my name. and 3 weeks later, he was passed away.
Oh, man. Yeah, Chuck had some a little mental deficiency. He was able to drive, he was able to do, but he was not able to function like a normal adult would. But he was at GCW. They give him the job of being the official ring inspector, and he also monitored the matches to make sure nobody was cheating.
That is correct.
That's how I met Chuck.
You owed him a lot of money.
I think I was the most fined wrestler at GCW during his time monitoring, and I know he wrote me over $1 million in fines. He kept telling everybody I was cheating. I detest that. I was not cheating.
Between you and Bad Company, you owe Chuck a lot of money.
Well, see, I was never part of Bad Company.
No, I'm saying, but Bad Company was the other ones that tried to shove stuff under the ring aprons, put them in the turnbuckles, and he would find them.
Yeah, I think it was, I think all in all, as an individual, I was the most fined person by Chuck. And it wasn't because I was putting stuff under the ring or in the ring. It was because of what I would do while I was in the ring that he would write me the fines. And, because I never hid anything. I never had to. I usually carried it out with me, or I was just brazen enough to put it right in your face. And that was the way I did it. But there were some things hidden under those rings. I remember some of the things that Chuck could pull out from under there. But
let's just start off with that. Let's just start off with what he pulled out from under the ring. I'll let you tell it, because this is the most hilarious story that we did a lot. Before we tell the story, we messed with Chuck. Everybody in the wrestling thing messed with Chuck.
Yeah.
But it was a fun mess with. It wasn't, we were trying to bully him. This was his job, and he enjoyed it. Did you know that when he died, his sister and daddy went in there and found notebooks? He recorded everything from GCW from day one. He had the notebooks.
Oh, wow.
He had a
Right.
filing cabinet for GCW.
So I think uh, one of the things I want to throw out here is to define exactly what Chuck was. So Chuck was the kind of fan that these younger wrestlers today are not going to be able to wrestle in front of. He was like a spider or a hamburger or an onion head. He was Chuck,
Yep.
and Chuck was definitely a very huge part of the show because of how big of a fan he was. And as wrestlers, when we get somebody like that in the audience, we use them. And you know, and every wrestler knows the truth of this. We will use our audience to help entertain the audience. And so Chuck was one of those guys that wrestling will miss because he made the show better. You know, so I want everybody to understand exactly what Chuck was. Chuck was something that I feel like I was privileged to be able to wrestle in front of Chuck, and because he was a once in a lifetime kind of fan. You just don't get to wrestle in front of people like that, you know. And so, with that being said, though, we did have a lot of fun. Not at Chuck's expense, we did, but we also had fun with Chuck. And one that pops out in my mind the hardest is after we had moved the show from Columbus to Phoenix City. And we had it at the skating rink over there. And they were coming in getting ready to do the show. And as they were cleaning the parking lot, they found this crazy dildo laying on the ground out there in the parking lot. And this thing did all kind of crazy stunts, you know, but it was probably about, I don't know, 10 to 12 inches long, and it vibrated and it twirled and it just did all this crazy stuff. And so Chuck's job every show was to come in after the ring was set up and to inspect the ring. And he would sweep the ring out with a broom, and then he would take a flashlight and he would get under that ring and make sure that it was safe and that there was nothing hidden under the ring. And so somebody turned that dildo on and threw it under the ring. And Chuck is doing his inspection. And next thing you know, Chuck's walking through the building holding this big dildo that's vibrating and twirling. And he's going, "What do I do with this?" And of course, we're all laughing like crazy. And Paul Chuck.
The funny thing is he walked up to one of the girls. I'm not going to say her name. She was young. She was 17, 18 at the time. He's sitting there holding this. He goes, "What do I do with this?"
Yeah, just that thing just a vibrating, man. And so yeah, that was absolutely hilarious. I want I'm gonna put you on the spot now, Bogue. I want to touch base on. I know Chuck was a lifelong fan. He was, but when I come in on Chuck's story is whenever they were developing, or when Jerry Oates was developing GCW to bring it back after Fred Ward was gone. Jerry was setting up a building over in Columbus. It had an upstairs dressing room, and he put a place in there with a weight stack in it for people to work out. And so at this time, you and I had wrestled together for years and years by then, but you got in with Jerry over at GCW and you started working out over there. And then Chuck came over there and Jerry put Chuck on the workout plan. So tell us about that, about Chuck's transformation.
Well, Chuck started at right around 300 pounds. Jerry put him on, told him how to diet, told him to quit eating the rotten foods. And this goes along with, yeah, we made fun and had fun with him. but everybody cared about him.
Yeah.
By the end of it, Jerry told Chuck, if you lose 50 pounds, now if nobody knows the shows we had in Columbus, we had this big long ramp with lights and flashing, and it was kind of like watching. Jim Cornette said it best. He said we were the WrestleMania of indies. And
Well, we were the OVW of our time.
right,
So and that's for sure. Yeah.
Jerry told Chuck that if he lost 50 pounds and got down to a certain weight, he would let him walk the ramp. He got to the weight and they did a whole special thing. He let him come down to. Let me tell you, you would have thought that guy was Hulk Hogan with the smile and the presentation. He comes down, he was so happy to lose the weight. They did it one more time when he lost over 100 pounds.
Yeah.
He went from like 300 and some pounds to 150 pounds working out with us.
Yeah. Which ultimately was the reason that he was around as long as he was.
Yes.
Because he was in poor health when all that started, and was able to salvage his health and get him back going. And so, yeah, just my watching Chuck make that transformation. But what people need to know is Chuck was a true fan, a true fan to wrestling. And when I came to GCW, I was in my prime. I was right in the middle of the best wrestling that I would ever do. And I was also on top of my game as a heel at that point. And I scared Chuck to death. Chuck was terrified of me, and that was not lost on anyone. Everybody at that show knew that Chuck was terrified of me. And with the way that people would pick on Chuck, I became an avenue for that to happen. And so, one of the other instances I remember very well is Chuck shows up to the show, and he would hang around where Jerry was at, and somebody had stolen the Mercedes emblem off of the front of Chuck's car. And I'm sure it was a neighborhood kid somewhere that did it. But Chuck didn't know who had stole his emblem. And I'm sitting in the locker room, and AJ Steele walks in, and he's wearing a Mercedes emblem around his neck. And I immediately said, AJ, I need to borrow that. Let me have that Mercedes emblem. And so which AJ, me and AJ have always been good. He hands it over, no questions. And I put that Mercedes emblem on and wore it for the rest of the night. And Chuck immediately jumped to the conclusion that I was the one that stole his Mercedes emblem. And so after the show was over, I wanted to egg it on a little further. So I went out there and I leaned up against the front of Chuck's car. And he walks out the door, sees me, and takes off running. And he ends up running. I think he run around to the back of the building and come in the back door. And then he was hiding in a stairwell.
Yeah, he was hiding in the stairwell that led to the workout room.
Yeah. And so he's hiding in the stairwell, and he didn't come back out. And so somebody come out and told me where he was at. So I walked over to I walked up the front stairs and walked through the locker room and started coming down the back stairs. And Chuck seen me coming down the stairs, and he took off running breakneck across the arena. Jerry was over in the very far back corner where they did the pictures, where they developed all the pictures at. And Chuck grabs Jerry and almost plows him. I mean, he hit him wide open. And he's screaming, Jerry, Jerry, Jerry. And he's turning Jerry to look at me. So he's got him by the shoulders, turning him. And Jerry don't know what's going on. And every time he tries to look at Chuck, Chuck's turning him back so he could look at me. And Jerry finally seen me out there. And he got mad, man. He got mad, and he told me to get out of the building. But Chuck was terrified of me, and so for it to be known of how scared Chuck was of me, what goes on after we move to the new building is priceless to me. This is my fondest memory of Chuck. Is when we moved to the new building, they actually give Chuck his own office.
Oh, yes.
So now the ring inspector has an office. I get to the arena early, like way early that day. I walk in and somebody says, "Yeah, you want to see Chuck's office?" I said, "What? They give Chuck an office?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, let me look at that." So I walk over there. Once I actually get into his office, they really give him an office. He had a nice wood desk. He had a nice office chair behind it, bookshelves and stuff. He had some chairs in front of the desk. It was set up like he was the CEO of the company or something, And I'm
He,
looking at that,
he wanted
and
to
I
have
go,
he wanted to have an office so when he could tell them about the fines they were getting, he could bring them in
"Yeah."
and talk to them.
So, so I very carefully turned every piece of furniture in that office upside down. I didn't tear anything up, but I didn't want to tear it up. I wanted to play a joke, not be menacing. So I very carefully turned every piece of furniture in there upside down, even the bookshelves, everything upside down. And as I'm walking out of his office, Eddie, the production crew manager, Eddie sees me walking out and he takes a picture of me walking out of Chuck's office. And so I didn't think anything of it. I went on about my business. I think I left there and went to the barbecue joint and got me some barbecue. And so when I come back, Eddie is beside himself. I mean, just absolutely. He's telling me, he says, you just got to go with it. You just got to, I'm like, go with what? And he said, well, after you left, he said, I outlined a body in Chuck's floor in the office. I put a tape outline of a body in the office. And he said, and I've got a couple of friends up here that are police officers and they are questioning Chuck now. I'm like, what? And so how far are we going to go with these jokes on Chuck? And I remember telling Eddie right then, I said, Eddie, y'all are going to go too far. You're going to ruin this. You're going to mess this up. You're getting too deep on this. And Eddie was like, oh, no, no, we got this. This is great. He said, because I showed Chuck a picture of you walking out of his office. And so I'm like, really? So the police are interrogating him, literally have him set down, and they're interrogating him about this murder that happened in his office. And he knows that I was in his office because he has photographic proof that I was in his office. And he would not tell on me to the police. They could not get him to name me as a suspect for nothing. They tried. They tried to bait him into it, and he still would not tell on me. And so at first I thought, well, Chuck's so scared of me that he's scared I'll do something to him if he tells on me. But that wasn't what it was. Chuck was scared of me. I mean, terrified, but he liked me and he didn't want me to get in trouble.
Chuck was one of the
And so
boys.
he wouldn't tell on me. So that is my fondest memory of Chuck because he literally would not tell on me for killing somebody in his office.
Well,
And
you're one of the boys. Do you remember what happened with Chuck after the you and AJ had your match with the electric chair? Chuck
I'm
was
trying to think.
crying. Chuck was crying because you got fried in the electric chair and thought you were dead.
Oh my God. Oh man. Oh man. Yeah.
He was scared to death of you, but he didn't want nothing to happen to you because
Yeah.
you
He
were
was
his
terrible.
wrestlers. We
I
were all his.
I picked on Chuck. I did, but I tried to keep it. And for all the, if any of the younger wrestlers that are building your careers now, anybody out there that is trying to find that balance on how to be a heel or how far to push something, listen to what I'm about to say. I pushed Chuck, but I always tried to keep it on a balance to where I wouldn't push it too far. That's why I got on to Eddie for doing what he did, because if you push it too far, then either somebody's going to snap and you're going to have a real problem on your hands, or you're going to blow it. And I wasn't worried about Chuck snapping. I was worried about us blowing it.
Right.
I didn't want to blow it. So because I had the power, I could be in the middle of a match. I could knock somebody down, and them laying in the ring or whatever, I could stop everything going on in that wrestling match. I could turn and scream Chuck's name, and he would run and hide right then. I had that power. And you want to talk about getting into a dull spot of a match to where things are just kind of going sideways and stopping everything and putting all the focus on the man that's so scared of me that he's running for his life, and then restarting the match and getting the match back.
I,
And it was a tool that I could use because of that. But yeah, Chuck, anywhere, anytime that I screamed at Chuck, he would run and hide.
I remember when you did that and you stepped out of the ring and Chuck took off. This was at the skate center. He took off away from the ring, around to the concession stand, about exploded a trash can to get behind the counter.
And he
He
dove
kept
over the
looking
counter.
up, kept
Yeah,
looking up.
he dove over the counter. It was one. That one blew my mind. I could not believe that he jumped over the counter.
That was
Right.
the one time you were trying not to laugh.
Oh, I was trying hard because what happened next was horrible. Chuck is hiding behind the counter, and I told you Chuck was he was not fully developed mentally. All right, so he was somewhere, I'd say mentally he was somewhere around 14 to 15 years old. That's about the age group I would put him in. And so imagine the counter is here, and he put his eyes where the counter, but you could still see the top of his head. And then he would poke his eyes up, and then he'd go back like that, but you could still see the top of his head. And he was hiding from me like that. And yes, it took everything I had not to laugh at him. And again, I did not take it too far. He's not hiding. Um, I left it there. I did not go behind that counter. I left it there,
You
right?
went
I
back
turned
to the
around and
ring.
left it there.
Yeah, you went
Yeah,
back to the ring.
yeah. So I left it there. So the time that it got pushed too far, the end of mine and Chuck's story, as far as all that went, was, and I want to say it was Eddie again. This was probably Eddie's doings. Was we were going to eat at the Bonanza, and all of a sudden, Chuck is stuck in a room face to face with the guy that he fears the most. And I'm standing there, and they bring Chuck in, and I look at them and I go, "What are you doing?" I said, y'all blew this. It's done." And they're like, "What are you talking about, man?" And I'm like, "You can't put us in the same room together. You just blew it." And so Chuck was so scared and didn't know how to act that I literally had to look at Chuck and go, "Chuck, I'm not going to hurt you." And that was the end of it. That was it. And they blew it. They absolutely blew it because they couldn't leave well enough alone. They couldn't enjoy what we had going, so they blew it. You know. And so again, for all our younger people out there that are listening to this, there is such thing as too much. You can go too far. You have to keep the balance. between far enough and not far enough. There has to be a balancing point in there. But I loved my time with Chuck. I really did.
Oh yeah. See, I got a couple great stories like that from back at the original building when we were working out. Greg Brown, who you've worked with a hundred times, and I've worked with Greg.
Yes.
One of the greatest guys to work with, but he's got a mind. He's running chess while everybody else is running checkers.
Yeah,
You
I'll
know,
agree with that. Yes.
he's thinking ahead to the next, and they kept getting on to him. Greg Brown was the manager of Bad Company, and they were the big evil guys that Chuck was trying to keep straight. And he would nudge at Chuck, and just do stuff. And we'd be up working out, and he would call up Chuck, you let them do this. You find my guys. We're going to get you. We were working out one day, and Greg calls him up. He puts it on speaker. We're like, me and Jerry are like, hey, Chuck, put it on speaker so we can be your witness. we're knowing everything that's going on. Greg gets on there and he says, Chuck, you and that Jerry Oates, and he was, getting really loud. He says, we're going to bring the NAACP down there. He was going on and on how the next.
No, you missed a part. You missed Chuck.
No, I'm going to get to that because this started at first.
Okay.
This started at first. He said, we're going to get the NAACP down there. So we're going in. He's doing this. I'm leaving. I'm going home. Now, right across from where Chuck lived, you could see a hotel. So I'm driving down the road, and I look over at this hotel, and there was all these buses from all the black schools, like all the schools, because they're having a big football game coming in that weekend. And I said, Jerry, I called him on the phone. I'm like, you will not believe this. After Greg Brown said that, I'm seeing all these buses from all these schools here. He tells Chuck drives an extra 10 miles around so he wouldn't be seen going to his house. So that came and go, and they kept messing with him. And he was talking about, Chuck, every time on the phone, you're going to have to give us an apology. We're going to do this and this and this. So the end all of this story, which is, it was like a crescendo before it got even worse. We're working out, and we're doing the push downs, and Jerry's over there. And if anybody here has ever worked out with Jerry, when you lay a weight down, it better be like a feather hitting the floor. He don't want to hear nothing.
Yeah.
If you touch, if you, just that much, he's screaming, hey, who's slamming my, Chuck's over there talking to Greg Brown, and we hear Greg. And let me preface this by saying Chuck has no bad bone in his body, but everybody is pushed to a limit.
Yes.
All of a sudden, we hear Chuck. I'm standing over there, and I wish I would have had my phone still. I don't know what happened to this phone, because I recorded this whole moment for about 5 years after this. We would laugh because I could play it. Chuck goes, Source? He wouldn't call him Greg Brown. He called him Source. He goes, you ain't nothing but a damn. And he says the word that you do not call a black person.
Yep.
All of a sudden, Jerry's got the tricep, all the weights. He's got like 50 pounds of weights at full extension. He lets go. You hear wham. Sounds like an explosion with the weights in. Chuck, you can't say that. You can't say that. Chuck had hung up the phone, and then he started thinking about what he said. He goes, oh no, I'm in trouble. About a minute later, Jerry's phone rings. Jerry answers the phone. Source, what are you doing? And I hear, I'm all the way across the room, and this room's 20 feet long at least. I'm all the way across the room, and I hear Greg Brown going, we got him. We finally got him. He snapped. Let me tell you, Chuck, he had Chuck the person he had a multiple personality in him.
Yes.
And the person that ran Chuck's body was a woman. Then there was somebody else that was kind of like Chuck that was never heard from. And then there was Chuck. So he just had all these. They actually made him sign a paper after the match. He had to tell, Greg Brown and all the bad company he was sorry, things like this. And they were all eating it up. But,
Yeah.
oh, it was hilarious. When I do the impression of Chuck that I'm going to do, I don't make fun of Chuck. This was really Chuck. We're at the arena and I'm building the new sound booth. They had the big, nice sound booth. And I'm bringing wood in off my truck. And Jerry says, I got to go. And another guy we had working there, he said, I got to go. And I said, okay. So I'm building. I was there till like midnight that night building this thing. Chuck was there with me. And if you know Chuck, he would, he was kind of unsure of himself talking.
Sounded like Richard Simmons when they talk, for real.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm out there, I'm marking my boards for my first cuts because I already knew what I was doing. And I'm lining them up to get ready to start cutting. And Chuck goes, well, I got to go. I'm supposed to be looking at a puppy. And I said, that's all right, Chuck, go ahead. I'll see you tomorrow or whatever. And we talked a little bit more. And he goes, well, I got to go look at a puppy. And all of a sudden, I hear the person in charge come out of Chuck. I'm starting to cut the boards. And I hear Chuck say, you don't need to check on no fucking puppy. You can't take care of yourself. That fucking puppy's going to die if you're taking care of it. I almost cut my fingers off with the saw. I'm laughing so damn hard. I said, Chuck, you go do what you got to do, buddy. He went and checked on the puppy. It was Chuck was my buddy. Chuck came to my house numerous times.
Yeah.
Chuck, my son was 6 months old. We were moving into the house we're in, and Chuck asked if he could come over and help watch my son while we were moving in so we didn't have to worry about him.
Oh, yeah.
He's sitting there holding my son, feeding him. And the whole time he's going, you better not drop him. I'm not going to drop him. You better not drop him. We're over there laughing. But that was Chuck.
I think I'd have been a little concerned.
Chuck was always helpful. He would not harm a fly.
I know it. Chuck was a special human being. He really was.
I think Chuck would have been with us a lot longer. He had a wreck. It was just a few days around Christmas time, and everybody that was at the skate center at the time, we flew up to where it was. He had blanked out or something, couldn't remember how he did it, went through a red light and T-boned somebody. We're in the ambulance. He did not want to go to the hospital, or his dad and them didn't want him to go. They said he's fine. I think if he would have went to the hospital, they would have found he had a defect with his heart.
Yeah.
Something happened to his heart. And it was January, I think, 13th, 14th. It was really a screwed up day because they didn't find him until 2 days after. But he was at the skate center and he went around to everybody, which was really weird because he didn't go to it. He would come tell me he was leaving and he would tell the lady in charge that he was leaving. But he went to everybody, gave him a hug, and I said, all right, Chuck, I'll see you tomorrow. Chuck didn't show up the next day, and we're like, well, that's just strange, but maybe he had something to do with his family. Sunday showed up, and we had a day that Chuck's usually there. So we called his family, and they went over to his house and found him in his pajamas, laid down. What the medical people said was he plugged his phone in and went to sleep.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to go, that's the way to do it.
Oh yeah, there's so many stories that could be told about Chuck, but the one thing is Chuck was a good man. Like you said, he would not turn it. He was one of the boys.
He was. He was.
He was
But
one.
before we kill this, Bo, I got one more thing to talk about with Chuck, and it's Chuck and you. But somewhere after mine and Chuck's stuff was over with, you had a run with Chuck, and y'all ended up in a boxing match.
Oh yes.
And Chuck was showing his brave face. He
Well,
was really
let
showing his brave face for this boxing match.
before we say boxing match, let's clarify this. We're not getting in trouble for beating on the disabled. This was a bouncy house boxing ring with the big gloves that were like
The
overstuffed.
inflatable glove, yeah, those
Yes.
big gloves. All right, but either way, Chuck is taking this very serious, and he is swallowed his fear, and he is going in there to face you. And before he went out there, I said, Chuck, come here. I said, you do know that Bogey's my brother, right? Oh, I know y'all are friends. And I go, no, Chuck, no, Bogey's my brother. So when you get in there, you better be careful because Bogey's just as mean as I am. And I watched his knees start knocking before, and then I watched him scared then um, look me right in the eye and go, "That's okay. I'm going to take it to him." And he put his stern face back on. And he walked out there to box you, and he mustered all his courage and went out there as a man. And I was like, heck yeah. It was
Let me tell you, I remember that boxing match, and I'll tell you, you would have thought I was the Mike Tyson's punch out. I was that little wimpy guy, and he was Tyson because he was throwing with everything he had.
that's why I did what I did. I wanted him to show up.
He showed up.
and but yeah, there's like I said, it was my privilege to wrestle in front of Chuck.
Yes.
It was absolutely we only get fans like that every once in a while. And right now I have not heard of any fans like that existing today.
No.
I don't know of any. And so that is one more piece of an era that has been lost that these younger wrestlers will never get to experience. And that saddens me because that was part of the magic of what we did. That was what made us go out there and do what we did. You
Chuck
know,
believed everything there was going on in that ring.
absolutely.
Did you were you there that no, you weren't there the night Jerry was bleeding.
Oh
Jerry
yeah, I was too.
with the cage.
Yes,
Do you remember Chuck? Chuck was beside himself.
he
He
was
was freaking
beside
out.
himself. Yes,
He
I was
was
there.
he at that point, that was the point where he actually, I don't know if you remember this, he actually stood face to face and was ready to fight Greg Brown and all them. He was standing
Yeah,
there ready to fight them.
because Sonny Siaki's the one that kicked Jerry and busted his face all the way from the top of his head down to his lips. And Sonny was one. Son, man, that was poetic watching him jump that cage the way he did.
Yes.
He just made it look like it was no effort at all, and went over the top of that cage and he kicked Jerry just caught him just right. And then of course everybody else poured in on Jerry and they got him. And so I was always separate from that. I never was part of Bad Company, and I was always on my own deal there, you know. And but I did do a lot of wrestling with Greg Brown. Look, and like you said, Greg was an encyclopedia, man. He was any given situation, you just give him a second, and he will come up with how to make money out of it.
Yes.
And so that is part of wrestling history right there. That crew in Columbus, most of the crew switched over to Phoenix City. But that crew in Columbus back in that time was probably one of the best groups of wrestlers that's ever been assembled in one place.
I'm
Yeah,
going to go ahead and say it was. That's
yeah. I mean, it was awesome. It really was. Um, and Chuck was a huge part of that. He was a very huge part of why that was what it was. And so, anyway, I'm gonna finish this up by giving it to Chuck. Love you, buddy. We
we.
miss you.
All
Yep.
right, everybody. That's it for Johnny's Garage this week. We'll see you on the next go round.
Have a good night.